His beady blue eyes stared right down deep into my soul. His eyes were squinted. He was breathing hard. I could literally smell stale coffee on his breath, and little bits of spittle jumped out of his mouth and hit me in the face, made me flinch away. His yellow teeth were crowded by a dirty beard. It looked like he hadn't washed it. Little bits of food were caught there. With every ounce of strength in his voice, he bore down on me, pointing and poking me right in the chest, as he said, "You are worthless. You will never amount to anything." His words cut me deep. Tears started to form at the corners of my eyes, and an anger welled up deep within me. My name is William Wood, and I'm going to be your trainer today, and that's an experience that happened to me when I was 15 years old, taking driver's ed in high school. As I've reflected back on that experience over and over again through my life, I have sworn to myself that I had a mission. And my mission was to undo the damage that has been done to so many of us by careless words at best and by pernicious words at worst. Words that are intentionally inflicted. In a moment of out-of-control rage or anger, a mother saying a nasty word to a son, a father insulting his daughter, a spouse with a sarcastic, biting, cutting mark, a boss who takes a jab at an employee, all acting like a boxer's powerful right hook, leaving the individual reeling for days, for months, and sometimes for a lifetime, unless that person learns how to deal with the negative words. There's an ancient proverb that says that the power of life and death is in the tongue. Our words have the ability to destroy, and our words have the ability to create. It is through the power of our words that we motivate, we lift, and we inspire. And in our darkest moments, it is the power of our words that inflict wounds that people then spend a lifetime trying to fix. Now, the good news is once you learn some of the simple ideas that I'm going to share with you today on this disc, you're going to have simple technology that you can immediately apply to change the negative self-talk in your mind, that you can use to change the negative biting remarks that were said to you. Nobody can take away what was actually said, but we can literally change the way that you feel about what's in your head. Last night I made a presentation and a 6-year-old was in the audience. I taught these techniques, these ideas, and these approaches to deal with negative words, and the 6-year-old was able to apply the ideas and change the negativity that was there in his head. The ideas that I'm going to share with you today are so simple, so elegant, and so powerful that you can literally rewrite the mental scripts of your mind. The other day, I was at the grocery store. I watched a 5-year-old boy excitedly going through the cereal aisle looking for his favorite cereal. In a hurry to get what he wanted, he reached up and he pulled 3 or 4 boxes of cereal right off of the shelf, made a mess all over the floor. Boxes of cereal everywhere. They fell right in front of someone's cart in front of him. That person had to stop. The mother went up to the boy, looked at him, poked him right in the chest and said, "You are so stupid and clumsy. I don't believe that you're making such a scene." And then she gave him a little swat on the bottom. And I thought, you gotta be kidding me. At that moment, I remembered my own driver's ed teacher. I remembered the stinging words that were spoken to me. And I thought, if she's not careful, this little boy is going to walk away with a story in his mind about who he is, about how dumb he is, about how clumsy he is. And I made a vow right then and there to get this message out into the world. So here's the first idea. Your words and my words, they create images, they create feelings, and they create sounds in the inner mind, in the inner ear of the person who hears them. And the way that you express your words will literally shape the experience of the person who's in front of you. So let me give you an example. Let's say that I asked you to think about an elephant. Now think about a cat. Now think about a dog. Now each one of those words painted a little mental image in your mind. Now some of you may have heard those animals, some of you may have seen them, and some of you may have had a multi-sensory experience where you were seeing, hearing, feeling, well, hopefully not tasting any of those animals. You were having this multi-sensory experience, or you're having an image or sound that came into your head. Now watch what happens when I flip it around. And I don't want you to think of a dog. I don't want you to think of an elephant. And I don't want you to think of a cat. Even though the words were stated in the negative, a word picture was created. Your words create pictures. The way that you use the tone of your voice creates emotion. And from today forward, I'd like to challenge you to be mindful, to be aware, and to be present fully of what the messages are that the tone of your voice and that your choice of words create in the mind. This technique is hands down one of the most powerful ideas that you will ever come across. When I first ran across it, I didn't realize just how powerful it was. I call these word pictures internal representations. And the words that you choose create representations that move people. The metaphors that you use. A metaphor is a comparison. Similes, metaphors. A simile is when you say something is like something else. A metaphor is when you say it is something else. He is such a pig. He is like a pig. He eats like a dog. She eats like a bird. These are all examples of ways that you are literally creating images in the mind. So for today, my first challenge in this disc is to be exceptionally mindful of the type of word pictures, of the types of metaphors and comparisons that you use in your language, because these comparisons, these words are literally shaping the experience of the people around you. Lesson number 1 is speak what you want. Create positive word pictures that do exactly what you want to do. Imagine your words are soldiers and they're marching into battle, and you want to tell your words what to do. You want to tell your words whether they should climb a hill or descend into the valley. Here's a story that's helped me remember this idea. A few years back, we bought new couches for the house. My then 5-year-old was just so excited to have these new couches that he immediately jumped on them and started bouncing. Now, my wife was really worried that the couches were going to get ruined. So she said, "Josh, stop bouncing on the couch." Now, just pause for a minute. What is the word movie, or what's the word picture that phrase creates? Don't jump on the couch. Well, the word movie that gets painted is still jumping on the couch and then maybe getting off or something like that. Well, that's exactly what Josh was doing. He was jumping on the couch, then he'd jump off, then he'd jump right back on again. All day long, he'd been jumping on the couch. Finally, she called me up and she said, "I can't get him to stop jumping on the couch." And I asked her, "Well, how are you doing it?" She said, "Man, I keep on telling him, Josh, don't do that. Don't jump on the couch." Now, inadvertently, she had created a series of word pictures that were doing the exact opposite of what her little word soldiers needed to do. So I suggested that she simply make one little change. And at this point, she was exasperated, so she was willing to try anything. And so I said, instead of telling him what not to do, why don't you tell him what you want him to do? And she said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Say this, Josh, you really are a good jumper. You can really jump high. Do you think you can jump that high on the ground?" And so she laughed and she says, "Well, I'm going to try it right now." So she did. She went up to him and she says, "Josh, you are a good jumper." And he nodded his head. "Uh-huh, I am." And then she said, "Josh, you can jump really high. And he nodded again. And then she pointed at the ground and she invited him and says, "Josh, do you think you can jump that high on the ground?" Immediately, he started bouncing on the ground, and he literally spent the next hour jumping all over the living room floor with all of his 5-year-old enthusiasm as he was now following the new word picture that her words were creating. Speak what you want. Create word soldiers that do exactly what you want them to do. So what do you do if you're a parent or a grandparent or a spouse and someone in your life is not using language in a way that's helping? Let me give you one more example, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the things I've had to do to work through the consequences of a coach. There was a coach that was coaching one of my son's baseball teams, and my son felt super loyal to this team, or I absolutely would have yanked him off this team because of the negative dialogue that was going on in the dugout. One day, it was the third inning, the team was actually doing really well. They were winning the game. And the team hadn't won a lot of games, and I think here in a minute you'll see why. The coach, in an effort to motivate them to play hard through the end of the game, he gathered the team around him, and he said, "Now you guys have done pretty well through the first few innings of the game. But usually, starting about in the fourth inning, it looks like you guys are bleeding out of the neck. You're out there and you're not paying attention. It's literally like you're losing blood and bleeding all over the place." And literally, these are the words coming out of his mouth. And my jaw hit the floor. It was the first time I heard him do that. I was furious. I thought, oh my gosh, he is literally using his words to destroy these boys, to destroy the self-confidence and the momentum that they had built through the first 3 innings. Sure enough, what happened? They went out in the 4th inning. It kind of looked like they were bleeding to death out there. Why? Because the coach, in a position of authority and influence, had programmed the boys by putting word movies into their mind that created exactly what he was trying to motivate them not to do. Now, if I'd been that coach, what would I have done? I would have said, "You guys have done awesome for the first 3 innings. And what I want you to do is to buckle down. Because as I look at each and every one of you, you all have a power inside. You all have a strength. Today, we will outperform them in the 4th inning. Today, we will outperform them in the 5th. Today, we will work harder, we will dig down deep, and we will reach inside and find the fire that's within each of us. The fire that burns, the fire to win, the fire that says, you are capable, you can do this." That is using language to create what you want. Now, what I had to do as a parent is I had to go in there and do damage control. Every time my son had a practice, every time he had a game, I literally had to go in and start to root out the words that had been planted in his mind, like a gardener pulling weeds. And I had to build my son back up with words of praise and powerful, positive emotions. The bad news is that some of the people in your children's world, some of the people in your own world, maybe some of the adults that were your mentors or your supervisors or your teachers as you grew up, they didn't know this information. And that's why this message in this CD, it has the power and the ability to change lives. So we've talked about the impact of words. What do you do when you've got some negative dialogue stuck in your head? Now, some of you actually hear the voice of your parent. You hear the voice of mom, you hear the voice of dad saying things said in a moment of anger, in a moment of frustration, in a moment of jealousy, in a moment of rage. Some of you tend to make word movies or make movies in your mind. You're literally seeing the event and hearing it. So you have this multi-sensory HD cinema running in your head. Some of you may just get the feelings from old ideas, or you may have lost the memory where the belief was created. You simply feel the sting of not being good enough or not measuring up. The bad news is that these things happen to you. The good news is you can change. You don't have to live with negative movies anymore. You don't have to live with negative self-talk. One of my favorite philosophers, Thich Nhat Hanh, he said this: we cannot change our past, but we can bring healing into our present. And because we can heal the present moment, we can heal our past by healing the emotions that are there. I want to share with you a simple idea that will help you root out those negative thoughts or those negative beliefs, whether or not you remember where they came from. Last night I had my family all gathered around and I was teaching them a lesson, all my children, about how to manage these negative thoughts. And there's a real simple little formula that works over and over and over again. What you do is you take a piece of paper, you fold it right down the middle. On the left side of the paper, you put a negative. On the right side of the paper, you put a positive. On the left side of the paper, under that negative, you write out any of the major negative comments that are running through your head. One of the most common negative comment that comes up in people's minds is the comment, I am not good enough. Now, sometimes that thought is planted in the mind by another person, but sometimes they're words that are generated inside of the person's own mind. That no one else told it, it's just something they feel. I'm not good enough, I don't measure up. And so I wrote that down on the whiteboard as I was sharing these ideas with my children. And I said, what are we going to do when a thought like that comes in our mind? And here's what I know. I know that children as young as 6 years old are having these thoughts. I see them in my office with my clients, and I've heard them come from my own children's mouth, and that burns inside of me. It burns inside of me because I know that there's a better way, and I know that there's a way to be free, to literally be free from all that negativity. And so even though I didn't know if any of my children had that specific thought right then and there, I knew just based on working with other people, and I knew from my own personal experience that that thought may be running around in their mind. So first things first, we wrote it down. I call this recognizing the negative. It's step one in a 3-step formula to change. So step number one is to recognize. So we wrote it down and we captured it. We don't try to change it. We don't try to minimize it. We don't try to, oh, it's just a negative thought. We just go, here it is. It's here in the mind. We're going to deal with it. So we write it down. Step number two is we replace it. We replace that thought with something positive. Now, there's a couple ways to do this. One way is on the positive side of the paper, on the plus side of the paper, you can just write the exact opposite of that old thought. So if the thought is, I'm not good enough, you can simply write, I am good enough. Now what I like to add to that is I like to add to it the word because. I am good enough because. And then we counter the negative with 3 pieces of evidence that we actually are good enough. Now for some people that might be a little too strong. But let me give an example of this first. So I am good enough because, and the 3 things, I don't remember exactly what my kids came up with, but they were something like this. I am good enough because I got a good grade on that one test. I am good enough because I earned some money to buy an iPod. I am good enough because I am a child of God. Now, you don't have to be churchy to do this. These are just the things that my children came up for themselves. Kind of an interesting mix of things, right? I did well on a test. I made money. God loves me. Now, your list might be really different. And it's really okay if the things that you come up with are itty-bitty little teeny-tiny becauses. but the power of because is real. So again, now sometimes directly countering a thought can be a little much for someone. So sometimes it's just kind of putting a different spin on a thought. One of my other kids had a negative thought come up during this session. He says, well, what would I do about this? I'm kind of nervous to perform in front of an audience. And that comes up that I kind of blow it every time I get in front of an audience. And so I said, well, is it okay if we work on this? So first we recognized it, and second we worked on replacing it. Well, first we tried to just directly counter it by saying the exact opposite. Oh, that's a little too much, right? It's a little too much to say, I'm good in front of an audience because I don't feel good. I feel like that's a lie. Now, I actually think that's okay. It's just an affirmation. They're just words. We can start to speak something new, and we can start to change our story. And yet it was a little too much, so instead, what we did is we said this: I entertain my friends daily, and the audience is my friend. Now that wasn't a direct counter, that was more of a sneak side attack into the problem, but it was really interesting to watch what happened as we countered the thought, or as we replaced it with something new. He started to smile, and he says, that is true. I do entertain my friends daily. And I've never thought about the audience as my friend. And I said, the audience is just a collection of people who genuinely like you and want to see you succeed. I mean, think about it. If you've ever been in an audience, don't you want the person on stage to do well? It's painful to be there if somebody's not doing well, so it's like we all have this little internal mechanism inside of us that says, do well, we want to see you succeed. Literally, after saying this new statement out loud several times, he said to me, I want to get on stage now. You see, the destructive force of words, when properly used, can destroy an old negative thought and can create a powerful new experience. So I have a direct challenge for you before we move on to the next segment. Will you, right now, pause this audio, or if you're driving, as soon as you're done, sit down with a piece of paper, fold it in half, write out one of your top 1 or 2 negative thoughts, and if it's more of a word movie, you just describe what's in that word movie. And then you counter it with a new word movie. Or if it's a phrase that comes to your mind over and over and over again, replace it with powerful, life-giving words. If you do it, you'll watch your life change. Now, there's a third step to this formula that I haven't shared yet. 3 R's. Recognize, replace, and then reinforce. The mind learns through repetition. By repeating the ideas that you learn, by repeating these new life-giving word pictures, they're like a seed that's planted deep into the heart and deep into the mind. And every time you speak them again, it's like you're watering and fertilizing and weeding the mind. And before long, the garden of the heart begins to bring forth a new harvest of life. And as you daily repeat these new thoughts, you can change. The darkest stories that play in your mind, replacing them with the glorious light of life-giving words and change.